Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast, bringing you weekly insights into the newspaper and magazine publishing sector. I'm Ciar Byrne, and this week my guest is Nicky Cox, Editor-in-Chief of First News, the UK's only weekly newspaper for children. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Acorn Web Offset, the Yorkshire-based specialist A5 and A4 magazine printer. With high-speed web offset and sheet-fed printing, together with in-house saddle stitching, perfect binding and mailing services, Acorn can cope with the most demanding of production turnarounds. Acorn prides itself on its efficiency and low-cost print production. For more information, visit acornweb.co.uk. Nicky Cox is the Editor-in-Chief of First News, the UK's only newspaper for children, with 2.6 million weekly readers across all its platforms. Nicky, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You started out in regional journalism before becoming the launch editor of Early Times, which saw you take 4 child reporters to meet Margaret Thatcher at Downing Street. Then you became the children's editorial director for BBC Worldwide, overseeing around 50 children's magazines from Teletubbies to Top of the Pops, before launching First News in 2006. Can you tell us a bit more about that journey and what it taught you about children's media?
Yes, it's been a very interesting journey because I was only 18 when I got my job as a trainee reporter on the Croydon Advertiser. And very early on, I spoke to the editor and the senior kind of editorial staff there and said, there was no news for children. And I said, they are part of the local population. They also have stories to tell and have, as much right to know what's going on in their area as adults. And I thought it was very strange that they didn't in any way address their younger citizens. And it's funny because I look back now and think, why was that in me so young? At 18, why was that a question even? And it's something then that just has become a lifelong passion, and that was, what am I now, 54, and I was 18, so I can't do the maths. But, for my entire career, children and publishing and children and news has been what's driven me.
And you launched First News in 2006. What was the thinking and aims behind it at that time?
I think it was the fact that more than ever, especially with, the internet now, that children needed a trusted source of news. And it baffled me, even when I was, a kid myself, that there wasn't a newspaper for children. And I never really understood why there wasn't, as if why wouldn't children be as interested in the world around them as adults? But when we launched it, as you say, back in 2006, it was to enormous ridicule. And all the adult papers who you would have thought would have been supportive, given that we were trying to give children a newspaper habit and an interest in news so that they may one day grow up to read their papers, they all just knocked the idea. They all said, if there'd been a need for a children's newspaper, it would already exist, and anyway, kids will just read stuff online, they're not interested in, a printed newspaper. And it was quite disconcerting because, we hadn't done any research at all. It was just an instinct and a drive in me to do it. And it did make me kind of question it for about 5 minutes. And then I thought, no, I know kids. I'd been working at the BBC for a number of years. I'd always worked with children. And I knew there was a need for it. And, it's now really amazing. Here we are in 2020 with more than 2.6 million children reading First News every week. It's the widest read publication for children in the UK. And actually, in terms of readership, we have more than the Times, the Guardian and the Telegraph added together.
That's quite amazing. And you've said that it's vital the next generation is better informed than the current or last generation. How are you going about this, and what are the particular challenges of writing newspaper stories for children?
I think just the fact that it exists, because really up until First News launched, there was pretty much, BBC Newsround, which was getting fewer and fewer viewers because children's viewing habits, along with the rest of the population, were becoming more and more kind of disparate. People watching a lot of stuff online, and so many more channels, that Newsround itself was getting a very small audience, and still does. So I think with the advent of First News and the reach that we have into schools, with nearly half the schools in the UK subscribing, it really does bring the world into the classroom, and it's enabling children to know what's going on. And how does the world become a better place if if people don't know what's going on as they're growing up? We want to have a generation of adults who have known about the world as they've been growing up, have understood what's making it tick, and everything about it.
And how have you evolved since the early days? What key lessons have you learned along the way?
I think when we first launched, it was very much us giving the news to children. That was what I felt. It's like, we need to tell kids what's going on so that, they can be better informed, and they can be tolerant, and they can be understanding, and they can, grow into active, engaged citizens. But what I didn't realize, but became very quickly apparent, is that what we also were doing, and we're doing increasingly now, is giving children a platform for their own voices to be heard. So we campaign with them. Again, quite early on in First News's life, I think maybe 2 years in, we ran a feature about child soldiers. And the reaction we got from children, from schools, from kids in this country who didn't even know that children in other parts of the world were fighting adult wars, were being given guns, were being killed, and were killing, and they may be 10 years old, and they were shocked. So and they were like, what can we do? This needs to stop. So we launched a campaign called Conflict Children, with Save the Children, and with the UK government, with DFID. And as part of that campaign, there was a letter that we wanted children to sign to basically call on world leaders to end the practice of using children in wars. And I thought, we might get 1,000 or 2,000 children signing this letter. And we got something like 280,000 children signed up. And it ended up with the Foreign Secretary at the time, who was David Miliband, reviewing the British government's policy towards child soldiers, and also taking it to the United Nations, where a special session was held. So it was so fantastic to be able to say to every single child, in the UK that had signed up, you did that, you made a difference. And I think since that, that's become a real passion of mine, that we listen to children, we find out what their concerns are, and we help them get a voice on the national and global stage.
And that topic of guns is quite hard hitting. How do you handle talking about these issues without scaring children?
Because the reality actually is that the news, for most of us, is actually a lot less scary than it appears, because the reality is that a lot of the adult news media organizations, be it TV or newspapers, kind of sell their news on fear. Fear does sell. And so stuff is, sensationalized. There can be very scaremongering type headlines. And actually, I see it very much as our job is to actually put that in context. And because there's been a terrorist attack, it's scary. But the reality is that for every one of us, it remains the least likely way that any of us are going to die. So we always put stuff in context. We always reassure that we're truthful. We don't shy away from reporting anything that's in the news, but we always reassure. We always put it in context, and we also always give them opportunities to talk about it, and tell them where they can go to get help if they are worried.
Now, you're the UK's only newspaper for children, but there are other current affairs magazines for children, such as The Week Junior. How do you sit alongside them in the marketplace?
I think First News is much more is more current. We The Week Junior is obviously related to The Week, which is kind of a retrospective look at the week that was. So I think we're a more current, up to date publication than The Week Junior. And obviously, being a newspaper format as well, I think is really quite key. There's lots of magazines for children, and lots of those are factual and entertainment, but it's the only actual newspaper. And I think it's really important for young people to know that they're being taken seriously, and that alongside all the adult newspapers they can pick up in the supermarket, there's one for them. And I think it makes them feel that they're being treated equally. They're not just, that they have their own newspaper.
And how much of a challenge is it when you're competing for children's eyeballs with TikTok, YouTube, other social media and computer games, which since you launched have become even more part of most children's daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, what we have done is we have a partnership with Sky News, with a children's TV show called FYI that we make in partnership with them, um, through our kind of production sister production company, Fresh Start Media. And FYI is a weekly children's news show. And we draw on a lot of the readership of First News for a lot of the content and a lot of the children that take part, because every single presenter and reporter on FYI is a child. They're all aged between kind of 10 and 15. Um, Again, we feel that it shouldn't be adults telling children how to consume the news and how to understand the news, and it's very much their take. And it's, there's lots of kind of short bursts on there. A lot of the stuff that they are kind of viewing on TikTok. So we've got things like laugh out loud videos on there. We've got things like, OMGs, and we have a section called Fake or Fact, and we have a section called Kids Comment where children get to talk about the news. So it's very much the sort of thing that they would be consuming anyway on social media, but all packaged into one kind of neat 15-minute show. And that's really working for us. And that partnership between First News and FYI is really strong.
Okay, so in terms of your revenue streams, how does it break down between direct subscriptions and the schools who are using you as a teaching resource?
Um, the schools, well, obviously we have people that subscribe at home, so we have many thousands of families that just get home subscriptions or buy it on the newsstand. When schools subscribe, there's various packages so that they can, we have some schools that literally get one copy for the library, and then we have schools that have a copy for every single child in the school. So depending on kind of the level of their subscription and what they buy into, they can also buy into the educational resources. We have an educational team that's pretty much the same size as the editorial team, who, as soon as the paper goes to press, they get to work on producing something like 250 pages of lesson plans, so that we enable the teachers to take the newspaper, and then um, we have all the aligned resources that they can then teach from the paper in the classroom. And we have those either downloadable, or we have a kind of a digital platform called the iHub, which more and more
Yeah.
schools are subscribing to, which enables them even to set homework on it. Children get passwords to get into the iHub, and they can do their work online, and the teachers can mark it online. But it's kind of literacy, but related to the news. And schools are finding that, children are much more engaged, because it's stuff they're hearing about, and it's stuff they're interested in the news, rather than, some kind of old, timeless piece of fiction or non-fiction. The fact that it's kind of based around um, current news is really engaging them. In fact, we had a survey done at a study by the National Literacy Trust into the kind of academic performance of children in schools that read First News, and it found that across the board, those children were overachieving and making faster progress than those that didn't.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think you had another survey recently around the time that you've had quite a big increase in readership recently, and you have very high approval ratings from parents and children. What do you think is the secret that goes into getting such high approval ratings?
I think it's twofold. I think that the kind of parents and teachers really welcome the fact that, there are difficult conversations to have. I mean, obviously, around the whole pandemic, we saw a huge increase in both our kind of home subscriptions and schools. We had 20,000 new parents signed up over the COVID time, because they didn't know how to talk to their children about what was going on, because I think they were confused themselves, you know, and um, and our job was again to kind of break it down into simple terms and explain exactly what was going on, uh, why they had to go into lockdown, even though children themselves were not particularly affected and still are not. They often show no symptoms, and if they do, they get very mild cases. So, our job was to reassure them while they were just reading headlines about how many thousands of people were dying. So it was important, I think people and parents actually, as well as then reading the paper, or their children reading the paper, we actually started to get lots of adults saying to us they preferred to read First News because it was kind of digestible, it wasn't scaremongering, and we just kind of tell it as it is, really.
And more generally, how is your business affected by COVID and by schools closing their doors, although clearly still carrying on educating children?
I mean, what we did immediately that schools closed was that we actually made First News available for free to all schools. Um, so they were able to sign up for free digital downloads. So not the printed copy. We weren't suddenly sending out millions of printed copies, but we made a free digital edition available to every school and every child, so they could send out a link, all the schools, to their children at home. So that's why we ended up, with far more engagement than even normally. So, and lots of those then turned into actual paying subscribers. So it's actually been very very good for us, which doesn't, I'm so aware that so many people have been having a very difficult time that it feels slightly difficult to say that actually it's been good for us, but it has. I think people more than ever appreciated the fact that children do need to be kept informed of what's going on around them, and that there we were sitting there, able to do that for them.
And have you continued that free digital offering, or did you have to bring that to a close?
We've brought that to a close now. Now that I think as soon as, in fact, the summer holidays then started, once the schools had broken up, because now schools are back, they're getting their printed copies as normal. So
Yeah.
we didn't feel that we needed to continue that now.
And you said in the past that children are 27% of the world's people, but 100% of the future. What do you think society more broadly should be doing to give children a better future?
I think, with all the technology that's around us now, it's so important to listen to children and give them a voice. I think, the old kind of phrase of children should be seen and not heard is just such an awful phrase, and hopefully has died out with an older generation. I think the opposite. Listen to children. They have so much to say. They have so much hope, and they're not cynical like adults, and I think the important thing is that we listen to them, and out of the mouths of babes, come the most amazing solutions. Later on today, I've got a conversation with the chief exec of WWF. We're talking about how we can engage more with children to make them part of decisions and policy making, because climate change is going to be something that affects them more than adults, and they need to be part of the solution. They're very switched on, they're very engaged, they're far more tech savvy than many adults. And I just think I have the most enormous respect for children, and I think we all should. They have very much a can-do attitude, and that's been shown by Greta Thunberg and the whole kind of way that children globally have responded to that. They want to help, they want to make a difference, and we as adults need to enable that. I love there's a phrase that's something like, as adults we never stand so tall as when we stoop to help a child.
As you say, climate change is a huge issue, and it's very close to the hearts of many children. And I imagine you'll be discussing the extinction of species with the WWF, which again is a big issue for children. What approach have you taken to these issues, and in particular, what was your stance on children skipping school to join protests?
It was a very difficult one, that, for us, because while we wanted to support children and and their voice and their right to protest. We also know that they're safest in school. We didn't want to support the fact that, children should be kind of, in effect, truanting and being out of school. But on the other hand, we didn't want to say, they didn't have the right to get their voices heard. So we reported on it. We said it was happening, but we also said, there's other ways of getting their voices heard, and we're here to help you do that. And we are, and the example I used earlier of the Conflict Children campaign, by being, the UK's only newspaper for children, we can get their voices heard in different ways. And we're also obviously terribly conscious that so many of our copies do go into schools and used by teachers. And the last thing we wanted to do was alienate all of them by telling children they should be walking out of the school gates. Our priority is that children are safe, and they're safest in school.
Sure. You tweeted recently that the latest issue of First News is truly international. How do you decide to split your coverage between UK and international news?
Kind of decides itself, really. I think, to be honest, when I'm looking at the balance of the content, I think less about that and more about the balance of kind of negative news stories and positive ones. Unlike a lot of the adult papers, I sound like I'm knocking them, and I don't mean to, but often when you're reading the papers, you can end up feeling really depressed because by the end of it, you've just read a lot of bad news. And I'm very conscious with First News that we do report the major headlines of the day. We do report all the serious news that children need to know about, but we're also very conscious that there's a lot of good news around and a lot of happy news that doesn't actually get reported very widely. So I'm very conscious of that, and sometimes that's international, sometimes that's UK, but that's I think more about that. We actually have an international edition separately, which goes out to schools and children around the world, which is just a digital version. So we have both anyway.
And what sort of audience does that have?
It has mainly, I think there's a lot of US, a lot of Middle East, and I think it's something like, I can't remember how many schools now, but it's around 100 schools globally can't take the international edition.
Right. What about fake news? How are you tackling that issue and improving children's digital literacy and well-being online?
We have a whole fake news edition of First News. Not that every single story is fake, but just talking about fake news
Mm.
and what it is and how to spot it, and showing lots of examples of stories, and actually the nuance in that a fake story is not necessarily all fake. It might be slightly distorted because whoever's written the piece, depending on who they're writing for, may have a particular point of view. But just to make them question that point of view and look at how other people are reporting the same story. So we're very, very engaged in that. In fact, I sat on the select committee for children's literacy and fake news. So we've been very, very involved in that whole area. And say any school or home can get a copy of the fake news edition. And we also have a lot of stuff online about it as well. And then FYI, our TV show, we have fake or fact in every single show, where we set up a couple of stories at the beginning. One of these is true and one of these is not. And, we reveal all at the end. And that's there. It's fun. It's quite a fun piece, but it's also just to make children question and think about it. Does this sound right? And is the person who's written this trying to make me have a particular opinion? So, it's something that we're very conscious of and that we're very aware that children need help with.
And you mentioned Fresh Start Media there and earlier as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, Fresh Start Media obviously because I kind of, sit over both, is kind of the video arm really of First News. I mean, for 14 years, I was running First News and it's fantastic. But also I was conscious that children are watching a lot of video online, and that I thought to complement the paper, video content was also kind of a key way that we needed to continue engaging with our readership. And we'd already been working with Sky News. We had a daily kind of Sky News bulletin on our website. We had a show called Hot Seat where we had a panel of kids quizzing people like Boris Johnson, Tim Peake, people like that. So we had regular kind of a hot seat show on Sky News as well. So the natural kind of progression of that was that we developed, an actual children's news show. So and also now alongside that, we've been working with the BFI, who have got a young audience content fund, to create a lot of explainers for children. We've just made 12 explainers on all sorts of subjects like climate change, racism, conservation, bullying, all sorts of different issues, and
Okay.
explainers about them, which are now available on Sky, but also on the First News website and in the First News teachers website as well. And we've got something called Kidversation that we're working with UNICEF on, which is one child in the UK meeting a child in another part of the world and looking at the rights of the child and how they're reflected in their lives. So lots of other factual video content that we're kind of developing together through First News for schools, through First News just for children at home, and through Sky TV.
You're aimed at 7 to 14-year-olds. Once children hit 15, what do you make of the media world that they are then confronted with? And what could UK newspapers be doing more of to retain the young readers you've nurtured?
That's a difficult one. It's it's interesting. I don't know how many of our readers, I don't think we've ever done any research into it, carry on to actually buy a newspaper. I suspect a lot of them probably would, over the course of time, kind of move into consuming most of their news on social media platforms and online. So I think, adult newspapers somehow do need to do more to engage with young people and to engage with us. I mean, because we obviously have them there, and as you say, when they get to about 15, I don't think anybody is particularly welcoming them. There isn't an independent really voice out there. Most of the newspapers have a political agenda, and I think that they should somehow try and nurture what we have created and give their readership a voice. I think that's the important thing that really stands us apart really from the adult papers, is it's not just one-way traffic, and I think that the adult papers could do far more to reflect the voices of their readership rather than just talking to them the other way around.
And more generally, what do you think the future of journalism is? Will there still be jobs for young people who want to be journalists? Will there still be newspapers for this generation of children to read when they reach adulthood?
I think so. I mean, I think that there's always going to be a place for actual printed newspapers. People like them, people like to hold something in their hands. It's very different, sitting outside, maybe having a coffee on a Sunday morning with your paper rather than being in front of a screen the whole time. We don't all want to be in front of screens the whole time. It's a different experience, and you can hand different sections around among the family. So I think printed newspapers always will be there. In terms of jobs, I think more and more and more, because the kind of the advent of citizen journalism, really, where everybody is a journalist now. Everyone's got a mobile phone where they can capture events as they happen. So in a sense, everybody can start a podcast or start a blog or whatever and be a journalist. So I just think it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time of change, and I think the key thing is to make sure that this young generation, are positive, engaged, active, and want to make the world a better place.
And why next for First News? What's in the pipeline now?
What's in the pipeline now is more of the same in the UK. We're in around half of schools. I'd like to be in all schools, so we're continuing, and particularly with the partnership with Sky and FYI now, we're pushing more and more video content through in partnership with the paper as well. So a lot more tie-in like that, which I think makes us even more attractive to schools. We'd like even more children at home reading, but also we have our eyes set on the global market. We want to enable children around the world to have the same access to news as we're enabling children in the UK to have. So very much on our radar. Now we've kind of set up the international edition is to forge partnerships in different countries around the world, and to and make the kind of the conversation with children truly global, not just UK.
Wonderful. And finally, outside of work, what do you do to relax?
I do this to relax. Weirdly, it's not just a job for me. It's an absolute passion. And, you know, as I said, I don't know why it was in me at 18. There I was, the youngest, most junior person on the local paper, asking the editor why there wasn't news for kids. I don't know where it came from, but it's in me. And other than that, I walk my dog. I have a beagle called Buddy. I walk him around parks, and that's my thinking
Brilliant.
time. And that's kind of it, really.
Great. Well, Nicky Cox, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
A big thank you again to Acorn Web Offset for sponsoring this podcast. If you're looking for a new magazine printer, then check out their website at acornweb.co.uk or contact Matt Carey on 07714 299 105 or by email at matthew.carey@acornweb.co.uk. Many thanks to Nicky for being our guest this week. You can find out more about First News at firstnews.co.uk. If you want to follow Nicky on Twitter, her handle is @firstnewseditor. To catch up on our previous podcasts, do check out the podcasts page on our website, inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening, and please join me next week on the In Publishing podcast.